The wind cut sharp through the canyons, rattling the thin wooden shutters of the small cabin like the growl of some restless ghost. Snow drifted in long, silent sheets across the plateau, blanketing the landscape in a blinding, endless white. Out there, beyond the glow of the cabin's hearth, the world was a frozen wasteland, and any soul foolish enough to travel alone risked vanishing into it forever. That's exactly where he found her. He had been following the tracks, the faint impressions of boots pressed into the fresh powder, winding between the pines like a desperate whisper. The trail was erratic, half-stamped and broken in places, as if whoever had made it had stumbled, fallen, then staggered on again. The man on horseback, broad-shouldered, scarred from years of cattle drives and dust-choked fights with rustlers, narrowed his eyes against the squall. He didn't know her name. He didn't know why she was out here, alone, but something in the frantic rhythm of her footprints tugged at him. He tightened his grip on the reins. The horse snorted, shoving its nose into the wind, and suddenly there she was, collapsed beside a drifted hollow, her dark coat soaked through with snow, hair plastered to her pale face. Her body shivered violently, and her lips were blue, cracked from the cold. She looked like a figure abandoned by the world, left to die where no one would find her. The cowboy slid from his horse without a word, his boots crunching in the icy crust. She tried to push herself up when she saw him, but her strength was gone, and her hands clawed weakly at the snow. I don't need," she rasped, the words barely audible over the wind. Then her voice caught in a sob, and she crumpled again. He didn't argue. He knew better than to argue with a woman too proud or too terrified to admit she needed help. Kneeling, he lifted her with the practiced ease of a man used to hauling cattle and pulling friends from near death. Her arms flailed, weak but stubborn. "Let me." "I can." She tried again, but her breath came in ragged gasps, and she slumped against him. The fire in her eyes dimmed, and she stopped struggling. The cowboy carried her across the snow to his cabin, each step a battle against the blizzard's teeth. He could feel the smallness of her, the fragility under the thick coat, and it struck him, sharp as a bullet, that this woman had been out here long enough to almost die. By the time he reached the cabin door, his horse pawed at the ground, impatient, blowing mist into the night air. He kicked it away gently, then eased the woman inside, laying her across a bearskin rug in front of the fire. She tried to pull away as the warmth touched her, twisting her head to look at him. "I don't," she started again, but he cut her off with a firm shake of his head. "Don't fight it," he said quietly, voice low and steady. "You're half frozen. Sit still, or you'll kill yourself before the night's through." Her eyes flickered, dark with shame, and she looked down at the floor. I can't. People." Well, her words faltered into a choked whisper. "They won't if you let me help you," he said. "Now, take off those wet clothes. I'll get you something dry." She hesitated, but the shivering betrayed her, and finally, she began fumbling with the heavy coat. The cowboy gave her space, though he kept his hand near hers, ready to steady her if she fell. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and the faint tang of salted meat from the evening's supper. It was small but sturdy, a place built for long winters and hard work. When she emerged from her coat, damp hair clinging to her shoulders, he handed her a thick blanket. Her arms wrapped around herself instinctively, but the fire's heat drew color back into her cheeks, and her lips regained some of their natural red. "I'm sorry," she said, voice trembling, eyes darting away from his. "You shouldn't have found me." "I didn't come out here to find anyone," he said, lowering himself to sit on the rug beside her. "I came out because I saw someone in trouble. You can call it fate, call it whatever, but that's all it is. Trouble in the snow, and I didn't leave it." Her eyes met his, and for a moment, she seemed to weigh the truth of his words against her pride. There was a tension in her shoulders, a battle between fear and relief. "Don't leave," she whispered. He could feel the weight of that plea, heavier than any storm he'd faced on the plains. He nodded, not saying a word, and sat back as the fire crackled. Outside, the blizzard raged, but inside, the cabin held a fragile warmth. Hours passed, the wind hammering at the walls, and she slowly recovered. She drank a cup of hot broth, sipped carefully, and ate a few pieces of dry bread. She didn't speak much, only watched him with guarded eyes, as if measuring the danger in trusting another person. He said little himself, only kept the fire going and listened to the night, to the sound of snow scraping across the roof. "You're quiet," she finally said, voice hoarse but steadier than before. "A man like you, always alone." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Been alone plenty, sometimes easier than dealing with folks. His eyes flicked to the window. But tonight, well, tonight I'd rather sit here than watch someone freeze to death. She looked down, embarrassed, twisting the blanket in her hands. I didn't mean for this to happen. I wasn't trying to. I don't need your explanations, he said. Not tonight. Just rest. The fire threw shadows across her face, softening the lines of fear and exhaustion. He studied her quietly, noting the strength that lingered in her posture. Despite everything, she'd survived something out there, something brutal, and still, she had the will to cling to life. The hours ticked slowly into the night. He made sure she drank enough, kept her warm, and finally helped her into a spare bed in the corner of the cabin. She tried to sit upright, stubborn even now, but he gently guided her down, letting her rest against the pillows. Sleep, he said simply. You've earned it. The storm's not going anywhere. She hesitated, then nodded, closing her eyes. The sound of her breathing evened out, and finally, the tension in the room softened. He watched her for a long moment before pulling a chair near the fire. He stayed awake, keeping watch, listening to the wind howl outside, thinking about the life she'd led to end up alone in the snow. Morning came with a pale light filtering through the frost-covered windows. She stirred, blinking against the weak sunlight. He was already awake, boots on, leaning against the doorway. You stayed, she said, voice barely above a whisper. I told you, he said, tipping his hat back. I'm not leaving anyone out here to die. She sat up fully, wrapping the blanket tightly around her. I don't even know your name, she admitted. Call me what you like, he said with a small smile. But you're safe now. That's enough. She looked out at the snow, then back at him, eyes wary yet grateful. I was foolish, she murmured. I thought I could make it on my own. Didn't want anyone to find me. He shrugged, brushing the dust of the morning from his coat. A lot of people think they can, until they're lying half dead in a snowdrift. She offered him a small, uncertain smile. And you just rode out, in that storm. And her voice trailed off, and she shook her head. Did what needed doing, he said, straightening. Now, get yourself dressed. I'll make some coffee, and we'll figure out what comes next. She hesitated, lingering in the doorway between pride and gratitude. Then, slowly, she moved toward the modest wash basin, splashing cold water on her face, her hands trembling slightly. He watched her carefully, knowing the road ahead would be as much about trust as it was about survival. Breakfast was quiet, the fire sputtering softly, steam curling from a pot of coffee. She ate slowly, her hands wrapped around the cup as though it were a lifeline. He didn't press, didn't ask her to explain anything she wasn't ready to. They were survivors of the same wilderness, if only for a night, and that was enough. Afterward, she gathered her coat, inspecting the frost-bitten edges. I should be going, she said. I can't. I don't want to be a burden. You're not a burden, he said firmly, and the storm isn't done yet. You stay until it clears. Then we'll talk about what happens next. Her gaze met his, and for the first time, he saw something beyond fear and exhaustion. She was wary, yes, but there was also a glimmer of hope, fragile but stubborn. She nodded slowly, letting him see her relief, her silent gratitude. Outside, the wind still rattled the cabin, but inside, the warmth lingered. He knew that this meeting, this night of snow and fear, would change something between them. Maybe it would heal. Maybe it would mark the start of something neither of them had expected. But for now, they were simply alive, two souls sharing firelight against the cold. The wide-open plains stretching out beyond, empty but waiting. And in the silence of the morning, he realized he hadn't just saved her life. Somehow, she had saved a part of him too. The widow, once left for dead, now leaned against the doorframe, eyes watchful but softer. And the single father, weary but steady, kept his vigil not out of duty, but because he had chosen to stay. The storm raged into the afternoon, snow whipping across the plains like a river of white fire. Inside the cabin, the widow moved quietly, unpacking a few belongings she had carried with her, though the bundle was small. She had traveled light, as though expecting to run, and as though the snow itself might demand she leave again at any moment. The single father watched her from the corner, polishing his boots, keeping one eye on the small figure moving around the cabin. He said nothing, only observed. There was a strength in her movements, even in her weariness, a quiet defiance that refused to be extinguished by hardship. You don't have to do everything alone, he said finally, his voice low, rough around the edges. You can ask for help. Doesn't make you weak. She froze, a bundle of blankets in her arms. Her dark eyes met his, wary but softened by the warmth of the fire. I've had to manage, she said, voice husky from disuse and the cold. There isn't anyone. There wasn't anyone. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the blankets on the table. I can't just rely on someone else. Not like this. He put down his boot brush and leaned against the wall. I reckon we're all leaning on someone else at one point or another. Doesn't matter if it's the first time or the 100th. Don't mean you have to like it, just that it's sometimes necessary. She looked down, twisting a strand of hair around her finger. Necessary, she repeated, as though testing the word, letting it sink in. I've never had someone stay, never had someone care if I lived or died. You did, he nodded, not saying more, letting the silence stretch between them. Outside, the wind moaned through the gaps in the log walls, rattling the shutters and sending long shadows across the room. The small clock on the mantel ticked methodically, counting the hours, a reminder that time continued even when the world felt frozen. She sat down at the table, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee he had poured for her. She didn't ask for cream or sugar, only sipped slowly, letting the warmth seep into her chilled bones. The single father watched her, noticing the subtle tremor in her shoulders that remained even after the fire had burned long and hot. Something told him that the snow had not been the only battle she had endured. Can I ask you something? She said finally, her voice quieter, more fragile than before. Go on, he said, settling into his chair. Why did you stay? The snow, the wind, you could have left me there. Most folks would have. She paused, eyes searching his face. Why not? He stared into the fire, hands clasped loosely together. Because it was the right thing to do. Doesn't always come down to reason or gain. Sometimes, it's just the way it is. He met her gaze. Besides, I reckon I've been where folks needed a hand and none came. I didn't figure I'd let someone else suffer if I could help. She nodded slowly, a shadow of a smile tugging at her lips. That makes sense. Her eyes flicked to the window, watching the blizzard outside. Out there, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't found me. I thought I was ready to die out there, and she swallowed, her throat tight. I didn't want anyone to know. He nodded, understanding more than she realized. Some things are best kept close, I reckon, but you survived, and that's what counts. The widow leaned back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. I should tell you, there are reasons I ran, people I'm avoiding, or who I thought I was, but I can't tell you yet. Not all of it, not until I know you'll stay. He shrugged again, with a faint smile. Fair enough, you tell me when you're ready. Until then, you can rest here. That's all I ask. The hours passed slowly, the storm outside showing no sign of letting up. She tidied the cabin, stacking firewood carefully, and he helped where he could, though mostly he watched. There was something in her movement, the careful way she handled the chores, the way she flinched when the wind rattled the walls, that spoke of someone used to taking care of herself in a world that offered little mercy. By late afternoon, the fire burned low, and she finally sank into a chair, exhausted from the day's Her hair hung in damp strands around her face, and her dark eyes looked up at him with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. Sit down, he said gently, patting the space beside him on the bench. Don't stand there looking like a ghost of the snow. You're not a ghost. You're alive, and that's something. She hesitated, then moved slowly to sit beside him. The warmth of the fire wrapped around them both, and for the first time since she had stumbled into the cabin, she seemed to let her guard drop just a little. I don't know how to be around someone without fear, she admitted, voice low. I've been running for so long, hiding, thinking the world would just take me if I let it. You're not running now, he said, and the world won't take you while I'm around. I can't promise forever, but I can promise tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure the rest out together. Her hand brushed against his on accident, or maybe on purpose. She froze, then drew it back slowly, as if the simple contact startled her. He didn't comment, only gave a small nod of understanding. Trust, he knew, couldn't be demanded. It had to be earned, piece by piece. The afternoon faded into evening, and the snowstorm finally began to ease. The wind dropped, leaving only the occasional whisper through the trees. Outside, the landscape glowed under a pale, icy light, and the world seemed untouched, silent except for the crunch of frozen ground. She stood at the doorway, Looking out at the clearing, the snow glinting like diamonds, the cabin seemed smaller, more intimate, the warmth inside a fragile barrier against the harsh wilderness. She turned back toward him, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. I should think about leaving, she said, voice tentative. It's not safe to stay too long. He shook his head, stepping closer. Out there's dangerous, sure, but out there's also cold and lonely, and you've had enough of both. You don't have to go yet. She hesitated, then nodded. I don't want to be a burden, she whispered. You're not a burden, he said firmly. You're just here, alive, that's enough. They moved to sit together again, the silence between them filled with the soft crackle of the dying fire. She leaned slightly toward him, the trust growing quietly but undeniably. He didn't reach for her, didn't push, only allowed her to find her own comfort as night fell. The snow had stopped entirely, leaving a pristine blanket across the plains. The sky was pale and starless, and the moonlight glimmered against the frozen edges of the trees. Inside the cabin, the widow and the single father sat close, neither speaking, both content in the shared quiet. Finally, she spoke, voice soft and almost shy. I don't know what comes next, but I'm glad you stayed. I don't say that to anyone. He offered a small, wry smile. Good thing you don't have to. I already know. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed to let herself believe in something beyond survival. You're not like anyone I've ever met, she said. You stay. You care. She trailed off, struggling to put feelings into words. Sometimes people are just what they are, he said quietly. Doesn't take much more than that. The night passed slowly. They spoke of little things, memories of distant towns and fleeting friends, small stories to fill the long hours. Laughter was scarce but genuine, a rare sound in a life that had known so much cold and danger. She finally rested her head against the wall, eyes heavy, yet she slept without fear, knowing he would not leave her side. Morning broke gently, pale sunlight creeping through the frost-covered windows. She stirred, stretching, and he was already awake. Leaning against the doorway, boots dusted with snow from an early inspection of the clearing. You're still here, she said, voice soft, half in wonder. I told you, he said, tipping his hat. I'm not leaving anyone out in the snow. Her lips curved into a faint, genuine smile. Then, I guess I'll stay a while, at least, until I can see what comes next. He nodded, relief and quiet admiration in his eyes. That's all I ask. One step at a time, and we'll figure the rest. The cabin felt warmer than it ever had before, not because of the fire or the sun, but because of the presence of someone choosing to trust, choosing to stay. Outside, the plains stretched wide, empty and cold, yet inside, the small space brimmed with fragile hope and human warmth. The widow, once left for dead in the snow, now faced a future she had never dared imagine, and the single father, weary of the hardships of the world, found himself tied to another soul by something stronger than snow, stronger than fear, a choice to remain, to care, and to begin again. In the quiet of that cabin, with the wind finally gone and the fire crackling low, they shared a simple truth neither had expected. Survival was only the beginning, and sometimes, the bravest thing a person could do was allow themselves to be found. And in that moment, as the sun broke across the frozen horizon, both knew that they had found more than warmth or shelter. They had found something harder to come by than the plains themselves, a reason to stay, a reason to trust, and the faint, fragile promise of tomorrow.